Good morning. Today is the 17th of Tevis, the 29th of December. We're starting a new mitzvah in Derech Mitzvotecha. Mitzvah's Kiddush Hashem, the mitzvah of sanctifying God's name. Okay, so this mitzvah, really what I wanted to do was the mitzvah of not desecrating God's name, not defiling God's name. But to know that, he sends us here, so we'll have to do this first. The other one has more basic ideas that were closer to what we've been discussing so far. But okay, we'll do this first. It's not very long. We should be able to finish it in the next 2 weeks before I leave in 10 days. Okay, so let's see. He writes like this: Mitzvah lekadesh shmo yitbarach. The mitzvah is to sanctify His name. What does that even mean? Shenemar v'nikdashti b'toch bnei Yisrael. As it says, I will be sanctified in the midst of the Israelites. ועניין זאת המצווה אשר אנחנו מצווים לפרסם האמונה האמיתית בעולם, שלא נפחד בהיזק שהוא מזיק, ואף על בה שבא עלינו מכריח, לבקש ממנו לכפותנו שלא נשמע אליו. So the Rambam writes, what is the inyan of this mitzvah? It's interesting that they didn't put it in quotes, because this is straight from the Rambam. The intent of this mitzvah is that we are commanded to publicize the true faith in God throughout the world, without fear of injury from any assailant, although any assailant or intimidator approaches us. And what does it mean that he approaches us? He wants to force us to either admonish God's name or to take upon ourselves some other form of faith.
Where does the Rambam end?
It's
still in the Rambam.
Yeah, it's still in the Rambam. לבקש ממנו לכפותנו שלא נשמע עליו. אבל נמסור עצמנו למיטה ולא נטעהו לחשוב שכפרנו, אף על פי שליבותינו מאמינים בו יתעלה. What does this assailant want to do? He wants to desire us to abandon our faith, meaning to force us, to induce us here is to force us to abandon our faith. But instead, we are required to sacrifice our lives. We know that there are 3 mitzvos that a person has to sacrifice his life and not transgress. Nor should we deceive him into thinking that we have denied God. And we can't even fool him. Although in truth our hearts we believe in Him, instead we should choose self-sacrifice. And there are a lot of laws about this, and what situation it is this way, and what situation it isn't this way. Yeah, he mentions it, because it says it in the Hebrew also.
Yeah.
So this is the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying God's name, which the Jews are commanded to observe. Or sanctify God's name is almost redundant in Hebrew. Kiddush Shem Hashem it would be. But we're not sanctifying just the name, we're sanctifying God Himself. So that's what the Rambam writes. And there are 2 different opinions about what the main mitzvah of the Torah is. Is the most important mitzvah, or we learn it from the transgression. Is the worst transgression Avodah Zarah, false gods, or is the worst transgression Shfichut Damim, bloodshed. ואף על פי, so now it writes the Tzemach Tzedek like this, ואף על פי שהדברים מבוארים היטב, אין צריכים לטעם ושורש. He says, what the Rambam writes, and in general, this mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem is explained thoroughly. What does it mean, explained thoroughly? In philosophy, it was explained very well. What does it mean? And it requires no additional rationale or source. Why? Because we understand that this is the essence of being alive. What is the essence of being alive? Today, to say this to a modern person is very hard, because a modern person thinks that the essence of being alive is to take pleasure, is to build himself up. But in the end, it's to have pleasure. This is a modern person in the Western world. It could be then in the third world, It's not exactly like that. Maybe they still have an inkling that there are other reasons, or they don't have any idea what the reason is.
Gaza, they have an idea. To the
Could be.
extreme, you know,
It could be. Yeah, that was part of the shita, the methodology of the fundamentalist Muslims,
Right.
is to ensure that the reason why a person is alive is in order to die. It's not to die a martyr does.
That's right.
And to take down as many non-Muslims as he can, or non-fundamentalist Muslims, as far as they're concerned. It's pretty much the same thing. And so there's definitely ideologies in the world that have supplanted this idea that I'm here to take pleasure. And what do? They tell you, oh, you live not such a great existence anyway. We'll offer you faith in the world to come, and these people are either simpletons or they're just brainwashed into it. They what?
Or they believe it. Like you said,
Yeah, they're
whatever it is,
brainwashed
it's a
into it.
belief.
Yeah, they're brainwashed into it. Okay. In any case, so what does this mean? It means that the purpose of life is to sanctify God. What does it mean to sanctify God? That's a very big question in and of itself. What do you mean by sanctifying God? Sanctify God. Does that make the world a better place? How does it make it a better place? Does it make it better for my children? Does it? What exactly does it do? Right? It's a very big question. So, as we'll see, in Kabbalah, the answer is that without sanctifying God, there is no world. It's not even about making the world better.
You know, the
Why?
translation here is very not right, I think. It says, the mitzvah, Kihu atzmo hu ha'ikr limsor nafsho ba. In other words, is that giving up your life, or is that being...
To sacrifice one's life.
It means giving up life.
Right.
Okay.
Again, to give up is a little bit different than limsor nafsho. Limsor nafsho means to sacrifice one's life.
Okay.
And we'll see...
Nefesh isn't necessarily the way we use
Right,
it.
doesn't have to be to die. It has to mean to dedicate.
So what does this mean? To
Limso.
sacrifice or to dedicate?
It means to sacrifice. That's why I would translate it.
Okay.
But
You hear what I'm saying?
orally, I would explain that the sacrifice, and especially this is the direction this is going to go, it means something a little bit different in practice.
Okay.
Because, thank God, it's uncommon for a person today to have to have to be in a position where somebody tells them either you worship my God or not. So, for instance, the Rambam, he solved for us a very big conundrum. I think he knew that we would face this at some point. By the Christians, there was never any question. Meaning that if, in the time when Christianity was undeveloped, when we might say more than just undeveloped, it was murderous. It was a very negative belief system. So many Jews had to face the question about whether they would express their faith in Jesus or whether they would die. And there many Jews theoretically would have chosen to die, although I don't think they really gave them a choice. The point wasn't for them to... When there was an Inquisition, maybe. And even then it's not sure, because the Inquisition also liked to say, okay, now that you believe in him, you have to make up for your past sins, and you do that by dying. So it's not sure that they ever really gave a choice. In any case, the Rambam faced the same situation with Islam. When he was escaping from Cordoba, from where he was in Spain, they passed through the northern section of Africa, and at some point they were forced to either say the Shuhada, which means the article of faith of Islam, or be killed. And as far as I know, he said some version of it that they could live with and that he could live with. And he later said this also to the Jews in Yemen who had the same thing, same problem. So in their time, there definitely was a very practical question about self-sacrifice.
Okay.
In our time, thank God, it's very uncommon. It's not that it doesn't ever happen, but it's uncommon. And meaning that somebody will come to you and force you to, because that's not what they're looking for. It's clear. It's not. They're not interested in your faith. They're not interested. They don't want to win you over. That's not the point. They just want to kill you. There's nothing like that. Even if you are accosted in this way or kidnapped or whatever. But obviously this has a meaning in daily life. And as we'll see, this idea of sacrificing oneself, meaning dedicating oneself to Hashem, is what keeps the world going. It's not so much an idea of changing the world, of fixing the world. It's more an idea of actually sustaining the world. And we'll see this, I think, today even.
You mean this isn't just the individual who goes to the klal?
Sorry?
This is addressed to an individual.
Right. This
You're
is
saying it affects the klal.
It affects the entire world. We'll see what it means.
Okay, fine.
שבשביל זה נברא אדם. Now he says, because this is the purpose of man's creation. This is what we were created for. So what were we created for? What does it say in the beginning of Genesis? To take care of the world. So you can understand that it's not just your personal mission. It's not just something that will lead to your fulfillment. It's something that's needed in order to sustain reality. And that's how we understand it. That faith in God sustains reality. That's somewhat different than the way that most people will say this. Most people, again, we haven't seen it yet in Kabbalah, hopefully we'll see it today. For most people, the understanding is that self-sacrifice is needed in order maybe not to destroy the world. Maybe if the world goes down to devil worshippers, then the world will be destroyed. That's the way you think about it. But to sustain it, to actually make it go day by day, that's not exactly the thinking. I don't think that's the way most people think about it. So there's going to be a lot of new things here. But as much as this is self-explanatory, again, he didn't say that it sustains the world. He just said this is the purpose of man's creation. So as much as this is self-explained, the lofty and laudable heights of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice, can be better understood by first looking at the explanation of the Arizal in Chayei Chaim. This book right here. So he didn't bring it here. It's very interesting. He brings only a small piece of it, but he says, listen, I'm going to tell you it's chapters 4, 5, and 6. It's very important for you, when he says something like that, he expects you to open it up and look at it, at least look at it, and see what it says. So let's see, first of all, how he sort of summarizes it, and then maybe look inside. So he says, Sheichud Abba ve'ima. What happens there? What does the Arizal explain there? He says that Yichud Abba ve'ima eno ela li'idei ha'ala'at mayim nukvin d'mesirut nefesh mamash. V'yichud za v'nukva hu al-yedei ma'aseh ha'torah ve'amitzvot. Okay. So what is he saying? What is all this about? Let's read it in English, just so that we have the English words in place, and then try to explain it. The unification of Abba and Ima, literally the supernal father and mother, referring to also to the Sfirot of Chochmah and Bina, wisdom and understanding, is achieved only through an arousal from below resulting from actual Mesiras Nefesh. Okay? By contrast, the unification of Zera Anpin and Nukva, who we saw in Mitzvah Tzitzis, we saw them a lot, literally the small face or the small continents, and the feminine dimension, referring to the 6 midos, the emotive qualities of the world of emanation and the sphere of Malchus of Atzilus, which is the feminine, is achieved through the observance of the Torah and its mitzvot and its commandments. Okay? So we have 2 unifications here. What is this about? So we're going to put this aside, and we have to speak a little bit. That the world is sustained by unifications. What does that mean? That this world, like Rashbi said on the day that he passed away, he said the world that we're leaving is like a wedding. Behilula, that's what he called it. He said on his deathbed, he said, the world I'm leaving, meaning this world is a world of weddings. What is a wedding? A wedding is a unification between male and female. So the whole concept of this world is what unifications can you achieve? What cooperation? What can you bring together? Or as like one of my teachers from way back used to say, to clap hands, you can't do this. You got to have a second one. So it says this world is about clapping. You always have to be bringing two things together. The question is, what are you bringing together? There could be many things you bring together. So here we have two symbolic and very important unifications. They're called the unification of wisdom and understanding, and the unification of Tiferet, beauty, and kingdom. In the Sfirot, that's like the left and the right of the intellect, and the heart and the action. They have to...
Male and female.
And they're both male and female. They're both masculine and feminine. What's the difference between the two? So the classic explanation that you'll find this everywhere in the Arizal, everywhere in the Zohar, also you can sort of extrapolate it from the Zohar, is that these two unifications are for sustaining the world and for bettering the world. In other words, the father and mother unification, wisdom and understanding, is a unification that has to be created to sustain reality. And usually the understanding is that this happens by itself. God does this by himself. The lower, and that's called the higher unification. Okay? The lower unification, which is Za and Nukva, or the small continents and its feminine aspect, that is in order to better the world. What's the difference between them? So now let's go back to thinking about what you said about that each one of us internally has all these facets in them. So when I unify my mother and my father, I sustain my psyche. I sustain my being. I don't get any better from it. There's nothing increases. To unify my mother and father, my intellectual faculties, and here I'm specifically saying my mother and my father because I have to have an image. I have an image here of what my mother and father are. My mother and father give me the basis on which my life is based. If I didn't have parents at all, I had some other figures, whoever they were like my mother and father, and they're needed to create a baseline that I can work with, something that I can go out into the world with. So when I unify them, I'm sustaining my life. I'm not making it any better. I'm just giving myself the foundation on which I can psychologically function in the world. That's what I'm trying to do. When I'm talking about the small continents and the feminine, here I'm talking about my own personal unification. Because the small continents is the I, is the me. Who am I connecting with to make my world better right now in the present? So Abba and Ima, the father and mother, are usually understood to be something like in the past. God created the world, and it's sustained. It keeps going thanks to that unification. There's a foundation upon which everything rests. And if this foundation wasn't firm and strong, the world would fall apart. In the same way that there are people whose foundation with their parents is not very good, and they can't figure out how to psychologically better it. And so eventually, somewhere down the road of their life, they fall apart. Their world falls apart. So I'm explaining this psychologically. The unification of Za and Nukva, that's already unification of my own doing. Who am I unifying with? And the most important one was me and my wife. And what does that lead to? It's supposed to lead to offspring, to children. So that's bettering the world. It's creating more in the world. It's bringing something new into the world. So the usual understanding is that you can't improve the world without unifications that you actually do. The first and foremost one is with your wife. That you make the world a better place just by having children. That already is it. Of course, there's a lot of other unifications. I have a business project. I have people that I teach. Whatever it is, some places I'm the masculine, some places I'm the feminine. But in any case, there have to be unifications to improve the world, to make it a better place. That's called the lower unification. Okay? So with this in mind, we didn't look at it inside, but with this in mind, God willing, we'll continue next week on Sunday.